Hi everybody. I just wanted to do a little bit more of a complex setup of a control scheme with set-driven keys, deformers, to follow up what we talked about in class this week. Alright, so first of all, over here, I've got some grouping going on that's a little bit more complicated than what we've done already. I've got this master group, which contains all the geometry and then also this separate controller on its own. So that's in an offset group. You pretty much and when you start rigging real characters, this will come into play. But I pretty much have an offset group on everything. So this offset group and then this controller. This is the geometry. It's also these two little extra locators that are controls that we'll see what we're going to use those for later. Maybe you can guess already. And deep down in here, I also have a bend deformer, which is just like we did in class, going through the handle part of the hammer here, so that we can bend that. So we don't really need to worry too much about the hierarchy right now. If it's relevant, I might explain it while I'm setting this up, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, so first of all, setting up the set-driven key to move the hammer back and forth is pretty easy. We did that in class already. And you'll notice I already put limits on this controller, so I can only go 20 or negative 20. And those limits I set in here. I'm not sure why it always defaults to rotate. That's a bit weird. But yeah, that's where I set those limits up. And I can really quickly do a driven key setup where I load in the controller as the driver, I load in the rotating part of the hammer as the driven. This is going to be really easy. So translate Z for the hammer, rotate X for the, translate Z for the controller, rotate X for the hammer, key at 0, move this forward, I like to make a round to numbers, key that. Now we can do this, and then make this all the way to the other end, and make this the opposite of what I had before, or whatever you want it to be. It doesn't always have to be equal on both ends. That's just what I'm doing for this mechanical type object. Key that, and remember these keys are not going to appear in the timeline. They are just attached between the two objects. So the controller and the piece of geometry are now connected, so I can whack stuff with that. And I just, the whole point of these controllers is to consolidate all of your controls into one object, so I don't constantly have to be grabbing this, rotating it, then doing other stuff when I'm animating. Okay, so I'll leave this open for now, but I'll minimize it. So we have a few other attributes in here that I made prior to this, and hopefully everybody remembers how to create a new attribute. You can just go to Edit, Add Attribute, or Modify, Add Attribute, same thing. So I have a bend, which does nothing right now, and I have a tilt forward and a tilt backward, which also do nothing right now. So the bend is going to be easy to set up. I'm basically just going to, once again, do a set-driven key, where I I just need to have this loaded in as the driver, which it already is, and I need to go find that deformer, which we saw earlier. It's in there. I don't really even need to see it at this point. I can just load it in as a driven. Now we're noticing that I can't actually, where I'm not getting the attributes in here. And this is kind of a weird thing, but I actually am going to have to click, select this just by clicking it. So select this input and then load driven. And now we have like two different pieces that I'm not sure why Maya has those separated. But hey, what do I know? I didn't program it. So we're going to do hammer bend as the attribute up here. Curvature is the attribute down here. Key those. Now this is going to be slightly more complicated than what we just did because I'm going to have to manually go into this attribute. I can't just move it or whatever. I'm going to have to manually be going into this attribute, say positive, I want it to go forward, so I'll put that to 10. Middle mouse click, by the way, to quickly adjust values, and I'll have this go forward, negative 75, sounds like a good number. Key, go back to this, and you can select stuff by clicking on its name here in the set-driven key editor. Now, this needs to go to negative 10, which right now it looks like nothing because we didn't set a key for negative 10 yet, so it just looks like the 0 position. But we need to set that to negative 10, go back to this, curvature, positive 75. This one's a little bit weird just because the negative and positive are kind of reversed, but key that. And now if I grab this guy, I can have this additional bending for a kind of more exaggerated animation once I get to the animation of this. After all, that's what all these controls are for. You know, when you're working on a group project, maybe you are in charge of setting up all the controls, but you're not the one actually animating it, but you still have to know what the animators are going to need in order to do the best animation they possibly can, or at least make their lives way easier. Okay, these parts are going to get a little weird. So this, I can rotate the whole thing forward, and this is just because I want it to be really exaggerated. This is also parented, but well, I have to figure out what I even parented this to. I parented it to this, which is kind of a subgroup in here, so that these two anchors are under this group, but also the geometry. So these are both technically parented to this all geo group, and we can see those over here, or I can click the actual constraint itself, and if I set them both to 1, then they'll kind of do a weird thing when I rotate them. They're like not going to work properly. Okay, so what I want to do first is I want to simply key each one of these two attributes so that when they're at 0, the respective opposite anchor is turned off, and at the smallest possible rotation, or sorry, the smallest possible value in this attribute, I want to swap the weight of the parent constraint. So I have my hammer control still loaded in for my driver because this is what I'm animating everything on for this. And in here I have my parent constraint loaded in as my driven. So here I'm going to start we're going to have to kind of almost do like a checklist here, because if we try to do too many things at once, we're going to get lost. So I'm just going to say for hammer tilt forward, I want to control the weight of the forward anchor. That's what I named these. They're just locators. Forward anchor and back anchor. So as usual, we key everything at 0 as the default. Now, for the forward here, and I can select here, and then I can get to this attribute. The smallest value I can do is 0.001. I can't do anything smaller than that. So as soon as that value is hit, I want this to have this weight to be controlled. So if I go into here, as soon as we're on 0.001, I want the forward anchor to be a value of 1 in the weight. Make sure they're both selected in here, and key again. So I really only need 2 keys for each one of these attributes. And hopefully that worked. So if I go to if I turn this to 0, and I look at my constraint, something weird happened there. Let me redo that real quick. Well, first of all, let me redo the 0. Make sure that is. Oh wait, that is what I wanted to happen. Duh. And then if I put this to 0.00, any value over 0 really, then this should be at 1. Okay, yeah, I confused myself there for a second. So as soon as this attribute, tilt forward, hits anything higher than 0, we want the forward anchor to be 1 and the backward to be 0. So let me go set that back to 0, and now we want to do the backwards one. So I'll grab all these attributes again, swap to this one up here, key at 0. In here, we can say negative 0.001. That's just how I set up the attribute to go negative instead of positive. So that's not really important. The 0.001 is the important part. And then in here, we want that to be 1. So they're reversed. And I should be able to key that. So here, we can go back to 0. They're both at 0. Anything higher than 0, and they are set up like this. So there's something extra though I want to do for that, which is that I want to rotate each locator. So this is going to be the easier part. So for this one, if I load the driven in, hammer tilt forward gets tied to rotate X. They're both at 0 right now, so that's not even going to work. But hammer tilt forward gets tied to rotate X of my forward anchor. So key those at 0. Then set this all the way to 10. And we can set this guy all the way to whatever we want. So maybe I'll make that 65. I like the number 65 for my attributes. It just tends to work out nicely. Key that, and now we can just do this. So this is now both animating the rotation and the parent constraint. And it happens so subtly since I've made it 0.001 that we almost never see a moment where it's not being controlled by the parent constraint. So now we just do the same thing for the backwards one. Grab this, replace as the driven. We're animating our backwards attribute and our rotate X. Key at 0. Send this to negative 10, which is its end value. This guy gets put to negative 65, and we key. So now I can grab this and do the same thing, and obviously weird stuff will happen, as you can see here, if I do them both at the same time, but we know, since we made it, that we don't want to do them both at the same time, so it doesn't matter. So we can do bend. We can tilt our hammer forward, the whole thing, tilt it backwards, and of course I can move this way. To be honest, I don't really know why I left translate X and translate Y on here. I might just lock and hide those. And visibility too. I don't think I'm gonna lock it, but I am gonna hide it. So we can see that we have, actually, you know what, I will lock and hide, just because I don't want that keyframe. So now we only have, the controls that we want visible. And if you are looking at noticing any of these things over here, we can just ignore those because those are just things coming out of the various SDKs. Sorry, I call them SDKs because I still think they're called set-driven keys when they're actually just called driven keys. But those are from the driven keys, and this is from the bend form. So now that we've had that all set up, we can actually animate this, which I'm going to have as a separate video.